Commander Park Geo floated in the cramped cockpit of his reconnaissance ship, staring at the star charts spread across his console. The Kepler 442 sector glowed red on his tactical display, marking it as a forbidden zone. 12 worlds, 7 different alien species, all gone silent in less than a week. This doesn't make sense, Jiho muttered, adjusting his headset as Admiral Chen's voice crackled through the communication array. Every probe we've sent returns the same data, the Admiral explained from Earth Command. The cities are still there. Power grids are running, but there's no one left alive on any of the worlds. Giho rubbed his tired eyes. He had been flying deep space missions for 8 years, but nothing like this. When the Varaxians abandoned their homeworld, it made headlines across the galaxy. Varaxians never ran from anything. They were known for their cold logic and methodical approach to every problem. If they fled, something was seriously wrong. What about the other species? Jiho asked. Gone within days? The Kalari packed up their entire civilization in 48 hours? The Thylorians, who have lived on their world for 10,000 years, just left everything behind. Even the Zephyrians abandoned their orbital cities. The Admiral's voice carried a weight that Jiho recognized. Fear. Not the kind of fear humans felt when facing a difficult enemy, but the deep primal terror that came from encountering something completely unknown. Sir, what exactly are we looking for? That's the problem, Commander. We don't know. The Galactic Council has classified the entire sector as a quarantine zone. No ships in, no ships out. But Earth Command wants answers. Jiho checked his equipment. One more time? His ship was deliberately simple compared to the advanced vessels used by other species. While alien civilizations relied on complex energy weapons and quantum computers, humans still use basic kinetic weapons and analog instruments. Most aliens considered human technology primitive, even backward, but it worked, was reliable, and it didn't break down when faced with unknown energy fields or exotic matter. Every other species has refused this mission, Admiral Chen continued. Their military commanders are calling it suicide. The Varaxian Defense Force actually filed an official protest claiming we're sending you to your death. Maybe they're right, Jiho said, programming his navigation computer for the sector boundary. But someone has to find out what scared them. As his ship began moving toward the Kepler 442 sector, Jiho thought about the strange reports that had been filtering back to Earth, entire populations evacuating within hours, ships fleeing in panic. Most disturbing of all, the complete radio silence that had fallen over the region. The journey to the sector boundary took 6 hours. As Jiho approached the invisible line that marked the quarantine zone, his instruments began picking up unusual readings. Space itself seemed different here. His sensors detected energy patterns that didn't match anything in human databases. Admiral, I'm getting some weird readings, Jiho reported. It's like space is wrong somehow. Define wrong, Commander. The gravitational fields are fluctuating. My quantum sensors are showing impossible readings. It's as if the basic laws of physics are being bent. Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. Commander, you still have time to turn back. No one would blame you. Jiho looked at the star charts one more time. Somewhere in that sector were the answers to questions that could affect the entire galaxy. Every species that had encountered whatever was in there had run away. But humans had always been different. They explored where others feared to go. Negative, Admiral. I'm going in. As his ship crossed the sector boundary, Jiho felt something change. The comfortable hum of his engine seemed muted. The lights on his control panel flickered briefly. Even the air felt different, as if it had become thicker. His destination was Zarian Prime, the former capital world of the Zarian Alliance. It had been home to over 2 billion beings from multiple species. Now, according to his sensors, it was completely empty. The approach to Zarian Prime took another 4 hours. As the planet grew larger on his view screen, Jiho could see the lights of cities still burning in the darkness. Orbital platforms hung in perfect formation around the planet. Everything looked normal, but his life support systems detected no signs of biological activity anywhere. This is Commander Park Jiho of the United Earth Ship Determination. He broadcast on all frequencies as he entered the planet's atmosphere. "Is anyone receiving this transmission?" Only silence answered him. The landing was smooth, setting down in the central plaza of Zarian Prime's capital city. Through his cockpit window, Jiho could see fountains still running. Transport vehicles parked neatly along the streets, even outdoor cafes with meals still sitting on tables. But no people. No aliens. No life at all. As he prepared to leave his ship, Jiho checked his simple mechanical watch. The time was 14:30 Earth Standard. He made a note in his logbook, using an old-fashioned pen and paper. "Admiral, I've landed safely. The city appears to be intact, but completely abandoned. Beginning ground reconnaissance." "Be careful, Commander. Whatever scared them might still be here." Jiho sealed his environmental suit and opened the airlock. As he stepped onto the alien pavement, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hunt was about to begin. The silence was the first thing that hit Jiho as he stepped out of his ship. Not the normal quiet of an empty street, but something deeper. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Zarian Prime's central plaza stretched out before him. A beautiful space filled with crystalline fountains and elegant alien architecture. Water still flowed from the fountains, creating gentle splashing sounds that seemed too loud in the emptiness. Floating transport vehicles hung frozen in the air above the streets, their anti-gravity systems somehow locked in place. Jiho walked slowly through the plaza, his boots echoing on the smooth stone. Tables at outdoor cafes still held plates of food, some with steam rising from cups of what looked like alien coffee. A child's toy lay abandoned near a fountain, its bright colors looking strange against the gray silence. "This is all wrong," Jiho said into his communicator. "It looks like everyone just stopped what they were doing and left."
No.
"There are half-eaten meals everywhere."
Yep.
He picked up a piece of clothing from the ground. It was a Vraxian work uniform, dropped as if someone had been walking and suddenly decided to run. More clothes created a trail leading toward the Spaceport District. The government building in the center of the city was still powered. Jiho used his basic tools to access the security system. The alien computers were more advanced than anything on Earth, but they still used simple electrical circuits that he could understand. The security footage from the last day made his blood run cold. On screen after screen, he watched the same scene happen across the city. Aliens of different species were going about their normal lives. Some were working, others eating, children playing in parks. Then suddenly, they all stopped. Every single being looked up at the sky with the same expression of absolute terror. Jiho had seen fear before, but this was different. This was the look of prey animals that had just realized they were being hunted by something they could never fight or escape. Within minutes of that moment, the entire population began moving. Not running in panic, but walking quickly in organized streams toward the spaceports. Parents carried children. Workers left their jobs. Even the normally slow-moving Thalorians moved with urgent purpose. They knew, Jiho whispered. Somehow, they all knew at the same time. He spent hours searching through the government archives, looking for any clue about what had caused the evacuation. Most of the files were in alien languages, but his translation software could handle the basic concepts deep in the historical records. He found references to something called the Devourers. The name appeared in documents from all 7 species, written in their different languages, but always referring to the same thing. The descriptions were vague, and often contradictory. Some texts called them demons from another dimension. Others described them as parasites that fed on the structure of reality itself. Most scholars seemed to think they were just myths, stories told to frighten children. But one report was different. It was written by a Vraxian scientist 300 years ago. She claimed to have detected strange energy readings before a small colony disappeared. Her colleagues had dismissed her work as fantasy. As Jiho read her report, the sun began setting. Over Zarian Prime, the alien sky turned deep purple, and the city's lights came on automatically. That was when his equipment started acting strange. His electromagnetic compass, which had been pointing steadily north, began spinning wildly. The needle moved in circles, then stopped, pointing straight up into the sky. His radio filled with static that almost sounded like voices speaking in a language he had never heard. The temperature gauge on his environmental suit showed readings that made no sense. One moment it registered -20 degrees, the next it jumped to over 100. The numbers kept changing every few seconds, as if the very concept of temperature was breaking down. Jiho looked up at the darkening sky, felt his heart stop. There was something wrong with the air above the city center. It looked like heat. Waves rising from hot pavement, but the shimmer was moving in patterns that hurt to watch. Space itself seemed to be bending, folding in ways that his eyes couldn't properly process. "Admiral," he said into his radio, but only static answered. "Admiral, do you copy?" A sound filled the air around him. It was not quite a noise, more like a vibration that he felt in his bones. It was deep and harmonic, like the sound of a massive bell ringing underwater. But it seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the air itself was singing. Jiho looked down at his wrist. His grandfather's old mechanical watch was still ticking steadily, its hands moving at their normal pace. But every piece of electronic equipment around him had gone dead. Streetlights flickered and died. The floating transports fell to the ground with crashes that echoed through the empty streets. The shimmer in the air above the city was getting stronger. Through it, Jiho could see glimpses of something that his mind refused to accept. It was vast and dark and moved with hungry purpose. Whatever it was, it existed somewhere else, in a place where the normal rules of physics did not apply. "Well," Jiho said, checking the ammunition in his rifle, "that explains why they ran." As he watched, the tear in space began to widen. Something was pushing through from the other side, something that should not exist in his universe. Jiho had found what had frightened 7 different species into fleeing their homes. Now, he had to survive it. The thing that came through the tear in space was impossible to look at directly. Jiho's eyes tried to focus on it, but it seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. It was like trying to see around corners or through solid walls. His brain hurt just from attempting to understand what he was seeing. The creature was made of darkness, but not the simple absence of light. This was darkness that moved and thought and hungered. Where it touched the ground, the stone cracked, and aged 1,000 years in seconds. Where it passed through the air, reality itself seemed to bend and break. Jiho watched in horror as a nearby building simply stopped existing. Not destroyed or collapsed, but erased from the universe as if it had never been built. The creature had somehow eaten the very idea of the building. His training kicked in. Jiho raised his plasma rifle and fired. The bright energy beam shot toward the creature, but instead of hitting it, the beam just vanished. It was as if the space between Jiho and the monster had swallowed the shot completely. The devourer turned its attention to him. Jiho could not see eyes or a face, but he felt its focus like a weight pressing down on his mind. Something alien and hungry was trying to push into his thoughts, attempting to consume his memories and personality. "Get out of my head," Jiho growled. Fighting against the mental pressure, he dropped the useless plasma rifle and pulled out his grandfather's old hunting rifle from his equipment pack. The weapon was over 50 years old, a simple, mechanical, the device that used gunpowder to fire lead bullets. Most people would have laughed at bringing such a primitive weapon to fight an interdimensional monster. Jiho aimed and fired. The bullet struck the creature, and for just a moment something incredible happened. The devourer became solid. Jiho could see it clearly for the first time, a writhing mass of tentacles and teeth that belonged to no sane universe. The creature let out a sound like reality screaming, and it pulled back from him. "Interesting," Jiho muttered, reloading his rifle. "You don't like simple physics, do you?" The creature recovered quickly and moved toward him again. Jiho ran, ducking behind abandoned vehicles and using the city's architecture to stay hidden. The devourer followed, but it moved strangely, as if it was not used to existing in normal space. Over the next few hours, more creatures appeared. They came through tears in the air, dimensional rifts that opened and closed like wounds in reality. Jiho counted at least 6 of them, each one slightly different, but all sharing the same impossible nature. He began to notice patterns in their behavior. The creatures seemed to hunt together, communicating through sounds that made his teeth ache. They were drawn to areas with lots of technology, power plants, computer centers, research facilities. But they avoided places where they had already fed, leaving behind dead zones where nothing worked and even the air felt wrong. Jiho spent the night hiding in an old warehouse, planning his next move. He had learned something important. The creatures could be hurt by simple physical attacks, but only when they were solid. The problem was figuring out when they became solid. The next morning, he watched one of the devourers feed. It approached a power station and began to consume the energy flowing through the cables. As it fed, the creature became more solid, more present in normal space. That was when it was vulnerable. Jiho had an idea. He broke into an abandoned alien laboratory and began mixing chemicals. The aliens had been more advanced than humans, but they still used basic chemistry. Jiho created simple explosives using materials he found in the lab. Nothing fancy, just chemical reactions that produced heat and pressure. He packed the explosives with metal fragments from broken machinery, creating crude but effective grenades. The key was the timing mechanism. Electronic timers would not work around the creatures, but mechanical clockwork still functioned normally. Jiho set his first trap at another power station. He placed the explosive device near the main power cables and wound the mechanical timer. Then he hid and waited. When the devourer arrived to feed, Jiho held his breath.
Wait.
The creature began consuming the electrical energy, becoming more solid as it fed. At exactly the right moment, the timer triggered the explosive. The blast caught the creature while it was partially solid. Metal fragments tore through its form, and it let out that reality-screaming sound again. This time, it did not recover. Quickly, the creature writhed and twisted before dissolving back into the dimensional rift it had come from. One down, Jiho said, but he knew there were many more. Over the following days, he hunted the creatures using guerrilla tactics. He learned their feeding patterns, their communication methods, their weaknesses. Each successful attack taught him more about how to fight them. But he also learned something terrifying. The creatures were not just randomly feeding. They were preparing something. Deep beneath the city, Jiho discovered ancient records that spoke of a dimensional anchor point, a permanent gateway. Between their realm and normal space, the aliens who had lived here had known about it for centuries but had never found a way to destroy it. They had simply lived with the knowledge that someday the devourers might return in force. That day had arrived. Jiho realized that what he was seeing was just the beginning. The creatures were testing the defenses, learning about this universe. Preparing for a full invasion, he was not just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was fighting for every living thing in the galaxy. The underground laboratory stretched for kilometers. Beneath Zarian Prime's capital city, Jiho had discovered the entrance hidden behind a collapsed wall in the government building's basement. As he explored the facility with his flashlight, he found room after room filled with research equipment and data storage devices. The aliens had been studying the devourers for hundreds of years. Jiho spent days reading through their research files, using his translation software to understand the alien languages. What he learned made his blood run cold. Every advanced species in the galaxy had tried to fight. These creatures, at some point in their history, the Varixians had built exotic matter weapons that could tear holes in space itself. The weapons had no effect on the devourers. The Thalorians had created dimensional phase shifters that could move objects between different layers of reality. The creatures had simply followed them into whatever dimension they fled to. The most advanced attempt had come from a species called the Architects, who had disappeared from the galaxy 50,000 years ago. They had built quantum entanglement, bombs that could destroy the very fabric of space and time. The bombs had worked, but they had also destroyed everything else in a radius of several light years. Every single approach failed, Jiho muttered as he read through the files, but they all made the same mistake. All the advanced civilizations had tried to fight the devourers, using the same kinds of energy and technology that the creatures fed on. It was like trying to fight fire with gasoline, but humans were different. Human technology was considered primitive by galactic standards, based on simple chemical reactions and mechanical processes. Where other species had developed beyond the need for such crude methods, humans had never stopped using them. Jiho's chemical explosives worked because they relied on molecular bonds that the creatures could not easily manipulate. His grandfather's hunting rifle was effective because it used simple physics, mass, and velocity rather than exotic energy fields. Most importantly, its mechanical timers and analog instruments continued to function normally even when the devourers were present. Creatures fed on quantum fields and advanced energy patterns, but they had no effect on simple clockwork mechanisms. As Jiho studied the creatures more carefully, he began to understand their behavior patterns. The devourers did not exist fully in normal space most of the time. They lived in a different dimension where the laws of physics worked differently. When they wanted to feed, they had to partially enter normal reality. This transformation process was their weakness. For exactly 2.3 seconds, while they were changing from their interdimensional form to a physical one, they became vulnerable to conventional attacks. During those brief moments, they could be hurt by bullets, explosives, or any other physical force. Armed with this knowledge, Jiho began hunting them systematically. He set up traps throughout the city using tripwires connected to mechanical triggers. When a devourer began materializing to feed on an energy source, multiple explosive charges would detonate at exactly the right moment. The strategy worked perfectly. Jiho managed to kill 3 more creatures over the next 2 days, but each victory brought new problems. Every time he destroyed one of the devourers, more appeared through the dimensional rifts. It was like fighting a hydra cut off one head, and 2 more would take its place. Jiho realized he was fighting a losing battle. He could kill individual creatures, but he could not stop them from coming through the rifts. He needed to find their source and destroy it permanently. Lay in the deepest part of the research facility. In a heavily shielded chamber, Jiho found records of the dimensional anchor point that connected the Devourer's realm to normal space. The anchor was located directly beneath the city, in natural caverns that extended far underground. According to the alien records, the anchor point had been growing for thousands of years. It was not just a simple rift in space, it was a massive tear in reality itself. Held open by crystalline structures that existed in both dimensions simultaneously, Jiho took an elevator down to the lowest level of the facility and found the entrance to the natural caverns. As he descended deeper underground, he began to feel the same reality warping effects he had experienced on the surface. His instruments malfunctioned, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with alien energy. The cavern that held the anchor point was enormous. The rift stretched across the entire space, a wound in reality the size of several city blocks. Through it, Jiho could see into the Devourer's dimension, an endless realm of hungry darkness filled with thousands of the creatures. Crystal formations grew around the edges of the rift, some as tall as buildings. These were the anchor points that held the dimensional gateway open. The aliens had tried many times to destroy them from this side, but the crystals were protected by the same reality-warping fields that made the Devourers so dangerous. Jiho studied the problem for hours, trying to find a solution. Every approach he could think of had already been tried by the previous inhabitants. They had failed because they had tried to close the rift from the outside. But what if someone went through the rift and destroyed the anchors from the other side? It would be a suicide mission. The Devourer's dimension was hostile to normal matter. Anyone who entered it would be torn apart by the alien physics within minutes. But it might be possible to survive long enough to plant explosives at the anchor. Jiho looked at his remaining supplies. He had enough chemical explosives to destroy the crystal formations if he could get close enough to them. His mechanical timers would work in any dimension. The question was whether he could survive long enough to complete the mission. "Sorry, Admiral," he said into his dead communicator, knowing no one would hear him. "Looks like I won't be making my report." He began preparing for his final mission. Jiho strapped the last explosive charge to his belt and checked his equipment one final time. He had enough chemical bombs to destroy all the anchor crystals, assuming he could reach them. Grandfather's rifle hung across his shoulder, loaded with every bullet he had left. The mechanical timer devices were wound and ready, standing at the edge of the massive dimensional rift. Jiho looked into the Devourer's realm. It was like staring into a nightmare. The space beyond the portal twisted and writhed, following laws of physics that made no sense. Colors that had no names shifted through the darkness. Shapes moved that hurt his eyes to look at directly. Well, Jiho said to himself, no one ever said saving the galaxy would be easy. He took a deep breath and stepped through the portal. The sensation was indescribable. For a moment, Jiho felt like he was being pulled apart at the molecular level. His body existed in too many places at once, stretched across dimensions he could not understand. Pain shot through every nerve as reality tried to decide whether he should exist or not. Then he was through. Standing in the Devourer's dimension, the realm was a twisted mirror of normal space. Jiho could see the anchor crystals clearly now. Massive formations that grew like living things, pulsing with energy that connected this dimension to his own. Some were as large as skyscrapers, their surfaces covered in patterns that seemed to move when he was not looking directly at them. His analog compass, amazingly, still worked. The needle pointed steadily toward the nearest anchor point, giving him direction in a place where up and down had no meaning. The Devourers noticed him. Immediately, dozens of the creatures converged on his location, moving through their native dimension like sharks through water. But here, in their own realm, they were different. Instead of the shifting, impossible forms he had seen in normal space, they appeared more solid, or real, which meant they could be hurt. Jiho raised his rifle and fired at the nearest creature. The bullet struck its center mass, and the Devourer let out that reality-screaming sound he had heard before. But this time, the creature did not just recoil, it bled. Dark fluid that was not quite liquid splashed from the wound. That's what I thought, Jiho muttered, reloading. You're not so tough in your own backyard. He fought his way toward the first anchor crystal, using his rifle and grenades to clear a path through the attacking creatures. The Devourers seemed confused by his presence. Nothing like him had ever invaded their dimension before. They were used to feeding on ordered reality, not fighting a determined human armed with primitive weapons. At the first crystal, Jiho planted his explosive charge and set the mechanical timer for 10 minutes. The device looked tiny against the massive formation, but chemical explosives were powerful things. If his calculations were correct, the blast would shatter the crystal's connection to normal space. The second anchor point was harder to reach. More Devourers had arrived, and they were learning to work together to stop him. Jiho had to use most of his grenades to fight through them, leaving him with only his rifle for protection. The third crystal was the largest. It's growing from what might have been the floor of this twisted realm. As Jiho planted the charge, he noticed something disturbing. Through the semi-transparent surface of the crystal, he could see images of normal space, Earth, other human colonies. The entire galaxy spread out like a map. The Devourers were not just planning to invade the Kepler 442 sector. They were planning to consume everything. Not if I can help it, Jiho said, setting another timer. By the time he reached the fourth and final anchor point, Jiho was surrounded. Dozens of Devourers circled him, moving closer with each passing second. His rifle was almost out of ammunition, and he had only one explosive charge left. The last crystal was different from the others. It hung in the air like a massive chandelier connected to the other anchor points by streams of energy that looked like liquid light. Jiho climbed the twisted structure that supported the crystal, fighting off creatures that tried to drag him down. His environmental suit was torn in several places. He could feel the alien atmosphere burning his exposed skin at the top of the crystal. Jiho planted his final charge and looked at the timer. 30 seconds. He could make it back to the dimensional rift if he ran immediately, but he would have to leave the timer unguarded. He could see several Devourers moving toward it. If they damaged the timer before it went off, the explosion would not happen at the right moment. All the other charges were set to detonate simultaneously, creating a cascade effect that would destroy the entire anchor system. But if even one charge failed to explode on time, the plan would not work. Jiho looked back toward the distant rift, then at the approaching creatures. He made his choice. "For everyone who ran," he said, and sat down next to the timer to guard it. The explosion, when it came, was unlike anything that had ever happened in either dimension. The destruction of the anchor crystals did not just close the rift, it sealed the boundary between the two realms permanently. The shockwave rippled through multiple dimensions. Closing every gateway the Devourers had opened in the sector, Jiho was thrown back into normal space by the dimensional collapse. His battered body somehow surviving the transition. When the rescue fleet arrived weeks later, they found him floating unconscious in an escape pod near Zarian Prime. But more importantly, they found his detailed notes on how to fight interdimensional parasites using simple human technology. Information would change galactic defense forever. GHO had done something no other species could do. He had stayed when everyone else ran away.